The night had that strange stillness that only comes before chaos. The sound of engines echoed in the distance, low, steady, and dangerous. He was one of them, a biker who had seen too much, done too much, and trusted too little. But that night, when he saw her, the sheriff's daughter, everything changed. Her eyes held the kind of calm he'd been chasing his whole life, a peace he never believed he deserved. And in that fleeting moment, under the pale glow of a flickering streetlight, he knew that falling for her would cost him everything. He wasn't supposed to even speak to her. Her father was the law, and he was the chaos the law tried to contain. Their worlds weren't just different, they were enemies by nature. Yet, there was something about her that drew him in like a flame that knew it would burn him, but refused to stop shining. Every glance they shared was a silent confession, every touch a sin they couldn't resist. He had lived through fights, betrayals, and storms that could break a man, but nothing had ever scared him like the thought of loving her. Rumors spread fast in small towns. Whispers turned to threats. The sheriff's men watched him, waiting for a mistake, and his own brothers warned him that no woman was worth dying for. But he couldn't stop. He saw something in her that made him believe redemption might be real, that maybe even a man covered in dust and regret could still find light. And for the first time, he was willing to risk the road, the gang, and his life for a single chance at something pure. Every night, they met in secret, a heartbeat between danger and desire. She would sneak away from her father's guarded home, and he'd be waiting by the old bridge, his motorcycle idling like a promise. They talked about freedom, about what it meant to belong to no one but yourself, and she'd smile like she understood. In those moments, the world disappeared. There were no badges, no rules, no sins, just two souls daring to dream in the dark. But dreams come with a price. And in a town built on loyalty and fear, love could ignite the very fire that destroys it all. He knew it from the start. Loving the sheriff's daughter wasn't just dangerous, it was fatal. Still, as the horizon began to burn red with dawn, he realized some roads are meant to be ridden, no matter where they end. Because sometimes, the most forbidden love is the only kind worth dying for. He tried to stay away. For days, he kept his distance, convincing himself that what he felt was nothing but a passing illusion, a trick of loneliness disguised as love. But the truth burned deeper with every sunrise. Her laughter lingered in his mind like the sound of freedom, and her face haunted him in the blur of his rides. The road had always been his escape, but now every mile only led him back to her. The more he ran, the more he realized that the road itself had brought her into his life for a reason. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was the universe's cruelest joke. Everywhere he went, the whispers followed. The sheriff's daughter seen near the biker bar. The outlaw caught staring too long at her window. People noticed everything in a small town, and rumors were as deadly as bullets. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to care. There was something sacred in the way she looked at him, like she saw beyond the tattoos, beyond the scars, beyond the wreckage of his past. She didn't see a criminal. She saw a man trying to outrun his demons. And for the first time in years, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. Their meetings became a rhythm, a heartbeat pulsing through the quiet nights. They met by the lake, where the moonlight touched the water and hid them from the eyes of a world that wouldn't understand. She'd tell him about her childhood, how she grew up watching her father protect the town, believing justice was simple, good and bad, right and wrong. But the more she knew him, the more she saw the spaces in between, the gray lines where humanity hides. He wasn't the monster they made him out to be. He was just a man who had lost his way, and she was the only one who could lead him back. Still, there was fear. Fear in her voice when she spoke of her father's suspicions. Fear in his eyes every time he saw the sheriff's truck parked near the road. He knew the day would come when he'd have to choose, run or fight. The past doesn't let go easily, and neither do men like the sheriff. But every night they shared made the risk worth it. Every kiss, every whispered promise under the stars, pulled them deeper into a love that felt both dangerous and divine. And then came the night when the sheriff himself saw them together. It was supposed to be just another meeting, another moment stolen from fate. But headlights cut through the darkness, and suddenly, the world that had been only there shattered into reality. She froze. He reached for her hand. The sheriff's voice thundered through the night, filled with betrayal and fury. That was the moment he understood. What began as love had just turned into a war. The days that followed were suffocating. The sheriff's rage spread like wildfire through the town. Every biker became a suspect. Every engine roared a threat. He knew the sheriff wouldn't rest until the man who had touched his daughter was buried or behind bars. The gang warned him to disappear, to leave before it was too late. But how do you run from something that lives inside you? He couldn't leave her, not when he knew she was the only pure thing left in his broken life. She tried to reason with her father, but words meant nothing against pride and fear. The sheriff believed he was protecting his daughter, not realizing he was destroying her from the inside. Every night, she cried alone in her room, staring at the road beyond her window, wondering if he was still out there. And he was, waiting in the shadows, watching from afar, making sure no harm came to her, even if she never saw him again. He became a ghost in his own town, a man trapped between love and survival. Then came the letter. She left it on the same bridge where they first met, hidden under a stone only he would recognize. Inside, her handwriting trembled with emotion. I don't want to live in a world that forbids love. Those words burned in his chest. He read them over and over until the ink blurred under his tears. It wasn't just love anymore. It was defiance, a silent rebellion against everything that sought to keep them apart. He realized she wasn't fragile. She was fire, and she had chosen to burn with him. The next night, he wrote again, not to escape, but to claim what was his. The wind lashed against his face as the road blurred beneath him. Every sound, every heartbeat, carried her name. He knew the sheriff was waiting. He didn't care. Some battles aren't fought to win. They're fought because the heart leaves no other choice. When he reached her house, the lights were off, the silence heavy. She was waiting by the window, her suitcase beside her. And when their eyes met, no words were needed. They were done hiding. As dawn crept across the horizon, the town awoke to the roar of his motorcycle echoing through the hills, with her arms wrapped tightly around him. It was the kind of moment that stories are born from, the kind that people whisper about for generations. But behind that beautiful defiance lay a storm gathering strength. Because the sheriff had made a promise. If he ever found the biker again, there would be blood. And some promises can't be broken. The road stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of dust and dawn that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. For a moment, it felt like freedom. Wind in their faces, hearts beating in rhythm, the world behind them shrinking with every mile. She clung to him, not out of fear, but with the conviction of someone who had finally chosen her own fate. For the first time, she wasn't the sheriff's daughter. She was simply a woman in love, chasing the horizon with a man who had taught her what it meant to feel alive. But freedom, they both knew, always comes with a price. They rode until the sun rose high above the desert, and the heat shimmered like ghosts on the asphalt. They stopped at an abandoned gas station, hidden between canyons that time had forgotten. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at her, really looked at her, and it struck him how fragile this moment was. The world would never let them be. Yet in her eyes, he saw something stronger than fear. It was resolve, the kind that could stand against storms, the kind that made him believe that maybe they had a chance, no matter how impossible it seemed. They shared stories under that blistering sky, about the lives they were leaving behind, about dreams too wild to ever come true. She told him how, as a child, she used to watch the horizon and wonder what lay beyond it. He smiled and told her the truth. It's nothing but more road. But it's the road that makes you who you are. There was poetry in the simplicity of it, and she realized then that the man the world called an outlaw was, in truth, more human than anyone she'd ever known. By nightfall, they found shelter in an old cabin near the border. It smelled of wood and rain, a forgotten relic of some other life. She lit a candle while he tuned his bike one last time, his hands moving with the precision of a ritual. The soft flicker of light fell across his face, revealing a mixture of exhaustion and tenderness. If this ends badly, he said quietly, I want you to know, I'd do it all again. She didn't answer with words. She stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest, and whispered, Then we live like this, one heartbeat at a time. Outside, Thunder rolled in the distance, a storm creeping closer, as if nature itself were warning them. But they didn't care. That night, in that cabin lost to time, they became more than fugitives. They became a legend in the making, two souls refusing to be broken by the weight of the world. Yet, while they slept, the sheriff's men were already on their trail, following the faint scent of gasoline and rebellion left behind. The storm was coming, and it would not pass quietly. By the next morning, the air was thick with tension. The storm had broken open the sky, and rain fell like bullets on the dirt road outside. He woke before dawn, the instinct of a man who had lived too long on the edge. Something in his gut told him they were no longer alone. He peeked through the cracks of the cabin wall and saw tire tracks in the mud, fresh, deep, and heading straight their way. His pulse quickened. He knew that kind of precision. The sheriff was close. She stirred, her voice soft and trusting. "What's wrong?" He turned to her, his jaw tight, eyes shadowed by truth. "They found us." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them like a blade. Then she stood, no hesitation, no tears. "Then we don't run anymore." The resolve in her voice startled him. The girl who once lived behind her father's rules now stood taller than fear itself. He realized she had changed. Love had turned her into something unbreakable. They packed quickly, no words wasted, no time to think. He loaded his pistol, checked the engine, and handed her his leather jacket. "If anything happens," he began, but she stopped him with a look that silenced the storm itself. "No more goodbyes," she said. "Not ever again." The moment was heavy, soaked in meaning, as if fate itself paused to listen. Then, with the rain pounding and thunder roaring overhead, they mounted the bike and rode straight into destiny. The chase that followed was the kind that towns whisper about for decades. The sheriff's truck tore through the mud behind them, sirens wailing through the rain. The road was slick, the sky a blur of lightning, but he didn't slow down. Every second counted. The wind stung their faces, the world reduced to the sound of engines and hearts colliding. She clung to him, whispering something he could barely hear, words that felt like a prayer and a promise all at once. At the edge of the canyon, the road split in two. To the left lay the border, a chance at freedom. To the right, the cliffs, a dead end. He hesitated for the briefest moment, the sheriff's lights closing in fast. And in that heartbeat, time seemed to stop. She pressed her hand against his chest and said, "Trust me." He turned the bike toward the cliffs. The sheriff's shout echoed through the storm. And then, like two ghosts chasing the impossible, they disappeared into the rain. The wind screamed as they tore through the canyon road, the cliffs rising like ancient guardians on both sides. The rain blurred everything into streaks of silver and black, and still, he didn't let go of the throttle. Her arms tightened around him, not in fear, but in faith. Somewhere deep down, they both knew there was no turning back. Behind them, the sheriff's headlights cut through the storm, relentless, righteous, blinding. The man was chasing not just an outlaw, but his own daughter's heart, and that was a battle no father could ever truly win. When the road began to crumble into gravel, he spotted an old wooden bridge hanging over a roaring river. It looked frail, half-eaten by time and rain, but it was their only chance. "Hold on," he shouted over the thunder. She didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and held tighter. The tires hit the bridge, the planks groaning beneath the weight of metal and destiny. Behind them, the sheriff's truck followed, its engine roaring like vengeance itself. The bridge swayed, wood cracking under the strain. Halfway across, lightning struck nearby, splitting the night with a white flash. The sound was deafening, a scream from the heavens. The front wheel skidded. For a moment, he felt the world tilt beneath him. Then, instinct took over. He steadied the bike, pushed forward, the engine crying out as if alive. They made it across just as the bridge collapsed behind them, swallowed by the furious river below. The sheriff's truck screeched to a halt on the other side, his face pale in the glow of headlights. He had lost them. They didn't stop until they reached a lonely barn at the edge of the plains. The storm had quieted, but the silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. He parked the bike, breathing hard, rain dripping from his face. She looked at him, her eyes trembling, not from fear but from the gravity of what they'd survived. "We can't keep running forever," she said softly. He nodded. I know. But in that quiet space, surrounded by the scent of wet hay and old wood, they also knew that love wasn't meant to be easy. It was meant to be tested. That night, as they sat in the dark, he pulled her close and whispered, "If the world burns for this, let it burn." She smiled faintly, tracing the scar on his cheek with her fingertips. "Then we'll rise from the ashes together." It was reckless, foolish, beautiful, all at once. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper, and for a brief, impossible moment, peace returned. But peace, like love, was never meant to last in their world. By morning, the sky was clear, as if pretending the storm had never happened. The air was sharp and cold, carrying with it a stillness that felt unnatural. He woke early, walked outside, and stared at the horizon. The sheriff would never stop. That much he knew. A man like that didn't rest until the story was over, one way or another. He felt the weight of it pressing on his chest, the inevitability of the fight that was coming. And still, when he looked back and saw her sleeping peacefully on a bed of hay, he thought, maybe some things are worth dying for. He spent the next hours planning, tracing maps on the dirt floor, calculating routes to cross the border undetected. She joined him, her hair loose, her eyes still fierce with determination. "We can make it to the hills," she said. "There's a town beyond them. No one will find us there." He wanted to believe her, to picture a life where they could wake up without fear, where their love wasn't a crime. But deep inside, a part of him knew that men like him didn't get happy endings. Not in stories like this. Later, as they prepared to leave, she found a rusted locket hanging from a beam. Inside was an old photo, two young lovers from decades past, their smiles frozen in time. "Maybe they ran too," she whispered. He took it from her, closed it gently, and said, "Then we'll finish what they started." That small symbol became their promise, their silent pact against a world that refused to understand them. Sometimes, love survives not through victory, but through memory. As the afternoon sun sank low, they rode again, the wind cool against their faces. The fields stretched endlessly, golden and quiet. For the first time, the road didn't feel like an escape. It felt like home. They laughed, they sang, they lived for each second as if it were eternal. And yet, with every mile, the tension returned. In his mirror, far behind, he saw a dust cloud rising, a signal he knew all too well. Someone was following. He slowed down, his heart heavy. "He's coming," he said. She turned, her expression steady. Then let him come. There was no fear left between them, only resolve. The chase wasn't just about love anymore. It was about freedom, about proving that even in a world divided by law and blood, two hearts could still choose their own fate. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire, they rode toward the final reckoning. The sun bled into the horizon, staining the sky in shades of crimson and gold. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley, where the road curved like a serpent below. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. He could feel in his bones, that electric hum of fate closing in. She stood beside him, the wind tangling her hair, eyes lost in the distance. "Do you ever wish we'd never met?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, at the fire and fragility mixed within her, and finally said, "If I hadn't met you, I'd still be dead inside. So no, I wouldn't change a damn thing." They lingered there, wrapped in the moment, pretending for a heartbeat that the world wasn't hunting them. But as the night deepened, the first echo of engines shattered the illusion. The sheriff's men were near. He felt it, the low growl of machines cutting through the still air. He turned to her, his eyes dark but steady. "It's time," he said. She didn't flinch, didn't cry. Instead, she reached for his hand and whispered, "Then let's finish this together." That one word, together, was all he needed to face whatever came next. They moved fast, back on the bike, the engine roaring to life like a battle cry. The road descended into the valley, the headlights slicing through the darkness. Behind them, multiple beams appeared, small at first, then multiplying like a swarm of fireflies with a purpose. The sheriff was leading them, his silhouette unmistakable even from a distance. The old man was relentless, driven by duty, anger, and love all twisted into one. It wasn't just vengeance anymore. It was heartbreak turned to fire. As they sped through the narrow road, the landscape turned wild. Rocks, dust, and shadows blurring together. The sound of gunfire cracked through the air, sharp and sudden. He swerved, the bullets grazing the metal, sparks flying into the night. "They won't stop," she screamed over the wind. He gritted his teeth. "Neither will I." His hands tightened on the handlebars, his heart pounding with equal parts fury and devotion. Every second was survival. Every breath was defiance. They reached a sharp bend that led toward an old quarry, its cliffs steep and deadly. He knew the terrain. He'd ridden it once as a boy, back when life was simpler. If he could make it through the canyon, there was a tunnel that led to the open plains. One last chance. But as they neared the edge, he caught sight of the sheriff's truck closing in. Their lights met for the briefest instant. Father and outlaw, both chasing the same thing, the woman caught between them. The quarry opened before them like the mouth of some ancient beast. The walls glowed with the last light of the moon, jagged and silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. He throttled hard, the roar of the bike echoing off stone. Behind them, the sheriff's truck thundered closer, tires grinding gravel, headlights glaring like judgment. It was no longer just a chase. It was an ending written long before either of them realized it. The bike hit a patch of loose rock, skidding sideways for a breathless second before regaining control. She screamed his name, clutching him tighter. The world spun, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Every instinct screamed to survive, to protect her at all costs. But the sound of the sheriff's siren, distant yet deafening, told him the truth. There was no escaping this time. The story had come full circle. They reached the canyon's mouth, a narrow pass carved by time and wind. The bike roared through, sparks flying as the metal brushed stone. Then, in the reflection of his mirror, he saw the sheriff's truck slowing. The old man was alone now. His men had stopped behind. Perhaps even they knew what was coming. He stopped the bike, cutting the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. He turned to her and said quietly, "Stay behind me." The sheriff stepped out of the truck, his boots sinking into the dirt. The years of authority and fatherhood weighed heavy on his shoulders. Rain began to fall again, thin and cold, dripping from the brim of his hat. "You took everything from me," he said, voice low but trembling. "You took my peace, my pride, my daughter." The biker stood still, his eyes steady, hands away from his gun. "I didn't take her," he said. "She chose." The words struck like thunder, and for a moment, the sheriff faltered, because he knew it was true. The daughter stepped forward then, her voice breaking the air like a spark in dry grass. "Father, please. I love him." The sheriff's jaw clenched, his hand twitching toward his holster. "Love," he spat. "You call this love? He's an outlaw, a criminal." Her reply came fierce, unshaken. "No, father. He's a man who'd die for me. Can you say the same?" The silence that followed was unbearable, filled with pain, truth, and a love too wild for the world to understand. And somewhere between the sound of the rain and the breath of the wind, destiny took its final step toward them. For a long moment, the world held its breath. The rain fell heavier, each drop carrying the weight of everything unsaid between them. The sheriff's hand hovered near his weapon, but his eyes betrayed him. They weren't filled with hatred anymore, only heartbreak. He looked at his daughter, the same girl he once carried on his shoulders, now standing before him with fire in her eyes and a man at her side who reminded him too much of himself in his youth. He had spent his life upholding the law, but in that instant, he realized that love was its own kind of justice, wild, uncontrollable, and cruelly fair. The biker didn't move, didn't blink. "You want my life," he said quietly. "Take it, but don't take hers. She doesn't belong in your war." His voice was steady, calm, almost gentle. The sheriff's grip tightened on his gun, the veins in his hand pulsing. The rain blurred everything, the man, the daughter, the dirt beneath his boots, until it all felt like a dream he didn't want to be in. "You think you can just ride in and ruin everything I built?" the sheriff growled. "You think love gives you that right?" The biker shook his head slowly. "No, love doesn't give me the right. It just gives me the reason." Then, like a crack of lightning, the sheriff drew his gun. But before he could fire, his daughter stepped between them, her body trembling, her voice cutting through the chaos. "No more blood," she cried. "Not for me. Not for hate. Not for pride." Her words sliced through the night, raw and desperate. The sheriff froze, the gun shaking in his hand. The biker's eyes softened. He had seen courage before, but never like this. She wasn't her father's daughter anymore. She was her own force, a storm that refused to be silenced. Minutes felt like lifetimes. The rain poured harder, drumming against metal and skin. Finally, the sheriff lowered his gun, his hand trembling as if letting go of everything he thought he was. "Go," he whispered, voice breaking, "before I change my mind." The biker hesitated, his instincts torn between defiance and mercy. But when he looked at her, when he saw the tears mixing with the rain, he knew this was the moment to end the cycle. He nodded once, silently promising her father that she would never be lost to darkness. They turned toward the bike, each step heavier than the last. The engine roared to life once more, echoing through the canyon like a heartbeat of defiance. As they rode away, she looked back one final time. Her father stood in the rain, his silhouette fading into the mist. A man who had lost everything, yet perhaps, for the first time, understood what it meant to love without control. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the weight of his badge and his grief, he prayed that she would find the peace that had always escaped him. The night stretched endlessly as they rode, the storm fading behind them and the stars breaking through the clouds. The world was quiet now, the chaos left far behind, replaced by the steady hum of the motorcycle and the rhythm of their hearts. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Words had carried them this far, but silence was where their truth lived. Every mile that passed felt like shedding another layer of pain, of fear, of everything that once kept them apart. The road no longer led to freedom. It was freedom. They stopped near the edge of a wide plain, where the land opened into infinity. The horizon glowed faintly with the first hint of dawn. She stepped off the bike, walking ahead barefoot through the wet grass, letting the wind dry her tears. He followed, his boots heavy against the earth. "We made it," she whispered, almost to herself. He smiled faintly. "For now," he said, his voice low, carrying both hope and the weight of reality. Freedom, he knew, was never permanent. It was something you fought for every single day. They sat together beneath the dying moon, sharing the warmth of silence. She rested her head on his shoulder, her breath steady, her heart calm. "What happens now?" she asked softly. He looked out at the endless sky, the stars fading into light. "Now," he said, "we live like the world doesn't get to decide who we are." There was strength in that promise, the kind that only comes from loss and survival. They had faced the law, the storm, and the ghosts of their past, and somehow they were still standing. As dawn finally broke, painting the world in gold, the road ahead shimmered with possibilities. He started the bike once more, the engine purring softly. She climbed behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, grounding him in a world that had tried to break them both. The first rays of sunlight caught her hair, and for a fleeting moment, it looked like fire, beautiful, wild, untamed, the kind of fire no one could ever cage. And as they rode toward the horizon, leaving behind everything they once were, a quiet truth settled between them. Some love stories aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be remembered, not for how they ended, but for how they burned, for how, even against the weight of the world, two souls dared to choose love over fear and life over survival. The road stretched endlessly behind them, carrying the echoes of everything they had lost and everything they had dared to become. What began as rebellion had turned into revelation, a story not about breaking the rules, but about breaking free. In a world built on judgment and fear, they had found something pure, love stripped of pride, stripped of pretense, raw and honest as the open sky. Their journey wasn't about winning or escaping. It was about finding the courage to choose truth, even when the cost was everything. And in that choice, they discovered something the world could never take from them: peace. The sheriff, left standing in the rain, became a ghost of his own conviction. He had spent a lifetime chasing order, believing justice meant control. But that night, as his daughter vanished into the horizon, he realized that love cannot be commanded, only given. His silence became his reckoning, his surrender not to defeat, but to understanding. Sometimes, losing what you love is the only way to learn what love truly is. He would never admit it aloud, but deep down, he knew that the man he hunted had shown him the meaning of mercy. Far beyond the town that had condemned them, the biker and the sheriff's daughter built a life defined not by rules, but by grace. They lived quietly, not seeking forgiveness, but living as proof that even the most broken souls can find redemption. Their scars became symbols of survival, their love a whisper against the noise of the world. They learned that freedom isn't about running. It's about standing still in your truth, even when the world calls you wrong. And in that stillness, they found a kind of eternity no law could ever touch. As the story fades into memory, one question lingers like the echo of an engine in the distance. How far would you go for love? Would you risk your name, your safety, your life, if it meant finally being seen, not as the world demands, but as you truly are? Because maybe the greatest rebellion isn't against the law or fate, but against the fear that keeps us from living fully. Love, after all, isn't about finding perfection. It's about choosing someone again and again, even when the world says you shouldn't. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that love, courage, and freedom are worth fighting for, then stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share your own story of defiance and hope. Because every heart carries its own road to redemption, and sometimes, all it takes is hearing one story like this to find the strength to follow it.